Hey guys, Josh Kent with US Arms here to bring you another video on the AR-15 platform through US Arms. Today we're going to show you how to build the upper receiver group. Okay, so in this video we're going to talk about the parts that you'll need to build the upper receiver, the tools that you'll need, and we'll go through some of the little nuances of assembly that are going to bring you the most accurate rifle that you can build with the parts and products that you have, and then we'll take you through the steps of building the upper receiver. Stay tuned with us, and thanks again for coming back. Okay guys, first we're going to cover the parts needed in order to build a US Arms upper receiver and most of your standard AR-15 upper receivers. So I'm going to start from the right here and work my way over to the left. So first off, we have a barrel nut right here. Okay, you're going to need a barrel nut. We're going to need a US Arms upper receiver group, our dust cover, our bolt carrier group, charging handle. Start here at the top. This is a mid-length gas tube, our gas tube roll pin, Sadlac phosphate gas block, 750 to match the outer diameter of the barrel. Here we have a 1-in-7 US Arms barrel. We have the retaining screws for the handguard for the upper receiver, a retaining band that's going to go into the barrel nut for the handguard, and we have our 15-inch handguard. These are the parts for a standard upper receiver group that you would need for assembly. Alright guys, at this point we're going to talk about some of the tools that you're going to need for assembly. We're going to start from the right. Here we have a 5.56 NATO go gauge. We will need a 5.56 NATO no-go gauge, and we'll talk about the reasons for that. A nylon hammer or mallet. We have a torque wrench set in foot-pounds. We have a torque wrench here set in inch-pounds. We have a marking for 75 inch-pounds for the handguard screws. Here we have a long punch, a short, fat, oversized punch, a 5/32 T-handle Allen wrench, a 3/32 Allen wrench, and a gas block assembly block. These are the minimum tools that you'll need for assembly. So the next step, we're going to take you through the assembly process and some of the nuances to make and build the best upper receiver group on the market. Thanks. Okay guys, now we're going to go on into the assembly process and all of the steps needed to finish, and there's not many, but to finish the upper receiver group. Okay, so the first thing I want to do, once I know that I have all of my parts here in front of me, the first thing that I want to do before assembly is I want to check the headspace of the barrel that I have with certified gauges. Here we have Pacific Gauge and Tool 5.56 NATO go and no-go gauges. There are different gauges. You have 223 Remington, you have 5.56 NATO, and 223 Wild. The only real difference between them is the free bore space out in the front, but the overall chamber length is going to be the same. So here we've just used standardized 5.56 NATO gauges. Okay, so the first thing I want to check, I've already went ahead and cleaned the chamber on this US Arms barrel so that I have all of the debris, any oil, anything like that that would build up to give me a shorter headspace. So I have just basically bare metal chamber in this barrel so that when I check the headspace with these gauges, I have metal to metal contact and I have a true dimension spec set for that barrel. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and disassemble this bolt carrier group. So by removing the firing pin retaining pin, I'm going to set this down here, drop the firing pin out, which will now allow me to rotate and remove the cam pin here on the bolt. And sometimes these things don't want to come out quickly, but there's our cam pin and our bolt is now in hand. Now you do not have to do this, but it's going to make it easier for you if you just go ahead and remove the extractor on the bolt. So you have your extractor pin and your extractor will come right out. Ensure that you have, for your bolt, ensure that you have the extractor spring, and if you have the additional donut, that's great. It gives a little more grabbing power, but you don't necessarily need it right off hand, but just make sure that you have a spring there to give you your extractor a good bite on the round when you go to shoot or reassemble it. So when you have this bolt in hand, you will have a bolt, the ejector, you can leave it in there, and a strip bolt. So as we move forward, I want to take and set this barrel to where I can get a hold of it. I'm going to set my bolt here. I'm going to go ahead and set out my go and no-go gauges. Put them right there. Now the gauge is used to check the overall headspace from the datum, which is going to be from the shoulder of the case here to the base or face of the case. So this is set, that we're checking basically the headspace from the face of the bolt to the shoulder of the chamber. Okay. So if we take a look at a go and a no-go in thousandths, the red, the no-go, is going to be slightly larger than the no-go. And if we were to continue forward to an even bigger chamber, we would have a field gauge, which we're not going to check here. So what we should have is a bolt that drops on the go and not rotate into battery or drop on the no-go, which is going to give us that nice tight chamber that we need, which is going to produce good accuracy for us. All right, so I'm going to grab a T-handle, a little Delrin handle here to maintain positive control of this bolt. Again, I have cleaned the chamber, so we have a good clean chamber here. I'm just going to take this go gauge and drop it in, ensure that there's nothing on the gauge, that it's clean. Drop it in place. Now I can press with just a little bit of pressure on the ejector, and I rotate that bolt into the barrel extension. A lot of people call it a star chamber, but it's actually called a barrel extension. So that has locked in the battery. I can now pop that loose. Drop that gauge in hand, don't let it fall on the concrete. Now I take my no-go, I drop it in place again, ensuring that the gauge is clean. And I press down and I try to rotate this in the battery, and it should not. Okay, so that means that I'm not able to turn this and rotate it in the battery, so that means that our headspace for this barrel is going to be exactly where we want it, and it's a good match headspace, and we're now able to continue forward with this barrel and assemble it with this bolt and bolt carrier group. All right, guys, step one is going to be taking the upper receiver group, all right, and we're going to go ahead and put our dust cover on. So if we take a look, we have two captured areas. We have one on the front of our upper receiver and to the rear. Our dust cover, what we have to do is we have to maintain spring control or spring pressure, positive pressure with this spring. This flat edge here needs to go and rest against the body of the upper receiver group. So what we have to do is we have to rotate that spring back in place. We're gonna hold it with our finger, press it as such, insert the front, and then towards the rear of the receiver we can take our punch, depress that back leg in, and once we feel it lock, we can release that spring against the upper receiver group, and now we have spring tension on the dust cover. That's step one. Step two, we're going to take the barrel and we're going to lock in place our location pin, which goes to the 12 o'clock position right here in the recess of the upper receiver. And the tighter the fit between the barrel extension and the upper receiver, sometimes you may have to work this back and forth. This is a pretty tight fit. And if it's super tight, but you could still get it in by hand pressure, that is a good thing. The next thing you want to do is grab a rubber mallet and just seat, give it a couple of taps, and have it seat. Once you see metal to metal contact between the barrel extension and the face of the upper receiver, you're good to go. Okay guys, the next step we're going to do, this is optional for you, okay, but we suggest it because as you shoot barrels get shot out, and then it's easier to replace the barrel and also get a better torque standard on our thread if we apply a little bit of anti-seize lubricant, a little bit of silver lubricant. It doesn't take much, and while it's set up here in our vise on our upper receiver mandrel, we can take this and just dab a little bit into the threads. You don't want to get any on the face of the barrel extension, so just be mindful of that. All right, we're just going to place some right there in the threads, and then as we run our barrel nut up, we're going to allow that to spread this throughout the thread. Now what this does for us is as it builds up, if we did put it on there, we would build up friction between the barrel nut and the upper receiver thread. Now that friction is going to keep us from getting a true torque spec. So as we set the torque spec, which here we set it at 100 foot-pounds, all right, as we go to thread this on, we can work this back and forth in through the thread so that it loosens the friction between the barrel nut and the upper receiver, and it gives us a true torque spec. Also, later on down the road, when we shoot this barrel out, we're able to remove the barrel nut easier and replace the barrel at the end user level. So after running the barrel nut up by hand with a little bit of anti-seize on there, moving it around, getting the barrel nut to kind of spread around the threads, once we get it tight by hand, we're going to take our torque wrench, and again here the spec for us in-house is 100 foot-pounds to set the barrel nut with the upper receiver. A lot of companies will torque them to 32 to 40 foot-pounds, and the reason why we torque ours at 100, one, we have 70-75 billet upper receivers. The metal's super hard, and we're able to do so. We've torqued these to right at 140 foot-pounds with no issues, just to see if they'd break. So 100 foot-pounds is going to be plenty. We also run a fully free float handguard, and the gas tube is also fully free floated. So we torque these a little bit more so that you never have to worry about your barrel coming loose or your handguard coming loose if you were to purchase a U.S. Arms upper receiver group or rifle. So we're going to go ahead and set this to 100 foot-pounds. And for this torque right here, if you take a look, we have 0, 50, 100. So we're going to set this at the 100 foot-pound mark. And as we set it, or you guys go to set anything for the barrel nut, you always run it up slow. And as you stage on your mark that you want to set it at, whether it be 40, 50, 60, 100 for us, as you stage it, I want you to get to that point and then hold for a few seconds to allow anything between the barrel nut and the threads of the upper receiver to settle. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys that. So as we apply our wrench, we're just going to run it up. And again, this is as far as you can go by hand. You're going to go ahead and set this with the wrench. All right, so I've hit the wall there. I'm going to set it. And now I'm going to pull slowly, watching my gauge, pull to 100, stage for a couple of seconds, and lean off of it. So once I've held for a few seconds at 100 foot-pounds, which is our mark, I've set. And now this barrel nut is set to 100 foot-pounds. I've taken away any possibility of like a friction lock, which would give me a false indicator of the torque between this barrel nut and this upper receiver. So once you stage and hold for a couple of seconds, you've kind of let any mechanical energy that you're delivering into that barrel nut to kind of settle and actually set this thing at the prescribed mark. So from this step, we're going to go into building the gas block and gas tube. Okay guys, the next step, once we put our barrel on and torqued our barrel nut, we now have to assemble our gas system. All right, so we have a Sadlac phosphated gas block with a 750 thousandths ID. The outside diameter for this barrel, if you take a look here, is 750 thousandths. So we have to have obviously a gas block that will fit it. Again, the next thing you want to pay attention to is the length of the gas system. This is a mid-length gas system, and this is a mid-length gas tube. So if we look at it, one of the easiest ways to make sure that you have the correct length gas tube, if you were to match up the gas port holes together, your gas tube should extend into the upper receiver just over an inch. If you're sitting at that length gas tube, it's going to be the correct one for the system. So we have a capture punch, and for our roll pin, we just set that up in there like such, and that's going to help us to set the roll pin into the gas block and gas tube. So as we take a look at our parts here, we have a gas port hole and a gas port hole. We want to make sure that those line up, and as you seat it, you can take a look here and see that the alignment of the gas tube inside the gas block, we should be able to push that roll pin in through that hole and it would secure it. Another thing to notice is that if I rotated this 180 degrees, it would still line up. However, the bend in the gas tube goes towards the barrel instead of away. If you ever see this, go ahead and stop yourself, rotate the gas tube 180 degrees, and reset it. Now the block we're using right here just allows us to kind of free up our hands so that we can drive this roll pin into the block and secure the gas tube. So once I've lined this up and I notice that this bend goes away from where the barrel is going to mount, then I'm ready to go ahead and set this roll pin. So again, I take my roll pin and I set it right on top here, keeping downward pressure on the block, and I just give it a tap to go ahead and seat it and get it started. Now while I'm here, I just want to give a double check to make sure my gas tube hasn't moved, and it should be slightly secure at this point, to which I can take my large punch, set it on top of the roll pin, and just give a couple of taps, and that's going to drive that roll pin flush. Okay, if you could imagine not having this block, how many parts and pieces you would have to hold and clamp. This block is really a lifesaver, and if you don't have one, I would recommend it. So as we look at it, our gas tube is secure, it's bent away from the barrel, and we have an assembled gas block, gas tube, and roll pin. Next step is going to be mounting the gas block onto the barrel and aligning it dead center with the upper receiver. Now we're going to place our gas block, gas tube onto this upper receiver group. So I'm going to slide this up onto, and you guys see where the gas porthole is, and our gas tube is going to go through this porthole here in the upper receiver group, at the 12 o'clock position. So as I continue to press, it should slide with if it does have a little tension, that's fine. Actually, the tighter the better, because you get a better seal, less gas leakage. So this gas tube, I'm going to get it as close to the center of that hole as I can, just by manual manipulation. And I'm also going to press this gas block back to the shoulder. All right. So as we look now, we have to put the retaining screws, set screws here with blue Loctite. But once I put blue Loctite in, I'm just going to run these up, and then I'm going to make a fine movement to adjust this gas tube into the center of that gas tube hole. Okay guys, once we've put blue Loctite on these set screws and we've run them up, the next thing we want to do again is make that manual manipulation of this gas block, making sure that it's flush. Now some people will tell you they want the gas block offset slightly, but here in-house we set the gas block all the way to the wall, and then we ensure that the gas tube is fully floated and suspended in that upper receiver porthole. So if you'll come around here and take a look, you'll see that the gas tube is fully suspended and centered in that 12 o'clock position of the upper receiver.
Got it.
So from there, once we've centered it, we maintain control, positive control, and then we're just going to go ahead and tighten these set screws down. Now these set screws should bind into the barrel metal, and again we want to ensure that that thing stays center while we torque this down. Well, it's not really a torque down, it's as tight as we can get it by hand. All right, and then we're going to set these and allow that blue Loctite to set and lock those set screws in place, excuse me. So once we've assembled this, now we're ready to continue on to mounting the handguard onto the upper receiver. Okay guys, once we've set this the set screws here for the gas block in place, again I like to just kind of take one more look here at the gas tube as it's set, to make sure it's not leaning on one side or the other, that it is fully suspended here, so that we have a true free float scenario between the barrel, the upper receiver, and this gas tube as it's going to provide our return. So this gas tube is able to allow the barrel to flex and whip how it should, and we get zero gas seepage from the return here between the barrel and the block. So the next thing we're going to do we're going to set on our 15-inch handguard. We've already put the helicoils in, so if you guys purchase a builder's kit from us, it will come with the handguard, the upper receiver, the lower receiver group, your barrel nut, all of the things that you need, minus the barrel, the bolt carrier group, little things like that you choose to use. So when you receive this handguard from us, it will already have the helicoils in there, so you won't have to deal or mess with that. So once we set this, we're going to take this handguard and set it up on the barrel nut, and there's a nice tight fit between the handguard and the barrel nut. And again, what you want to do is align this as best you can. Now you can also take a scope rail or a Picatinny mount and grab halfway on the rail, halfway on the upper receiver, and that would line it up, be it almost like a machine lining that you could tighten those screws. And then we would place our 2 screws that we have here and our barrel mounting locator here that would go in between at the 6 o'clock position, and then we tighten them down. This little jut that sticks out here on this sleeve will go towards the rear. So you would not mount it this way. It would not go towards the front. It would be mounted with this upward portion being close to the upper receiver. And really there's only one way to drop it in, and if you put it in the correct position, it'll line up, and then we can drop our 2 screws into the mounting holes and then go ahead and tighten them down. Now what we want to do is just kind of run these up. I have a 5/32 T-handle here. I'm just going to run these down, just get them somewhat tight, or almost like finger tight, and then that will allow me to still have not enough friction that I can manipulate this handguard slightly left, slightly right, to where it is dead center located on this upper receiver group. Once I've done this without moving the handguard, I just want to kind of snug these up with my T-handle, and then I want to come back behind it myself and torque these. Okay, let's see where I can get this easier. I want to go ahead and torque these to 75 inch-pounds. So if you don't have this, I would say, as you're tightening them, don't try to wring it out, because you could strip or break it if you got too crazy with it. But we've tightened these down to 95 inch-pounds, and it was still fine. So, but 75 inch-pounds is what we would tell you to mount these things at. So that's what we're going to go ahead and mount these particular screws. And again, almost like putting a tire on, you want to kind of go back and forth, because as you tighten one, the other one will loosen. And so I'm going to go to about 50 inch-pounds right there, and then I'm going to come back to my initial screw, set it, and pull it till I get to about my 75 inch-pound mark, which is about right there. Okay, and I'm going to back off, and then I'm going to go to the secondary and bring it to the same. Now, one of the benefits of doing so is that we have both of our screws on the same torque setting, meaning that one's not tighter than the other. So with all the jarring around, the hustle and bustle, we now have the 2 screws tensioned at the same spec. So if one loosens, they both have to loosen at the same time. But with that kind of bite with our handguard between the barrel nut and our handguard, that it's not going to come loose. We have a good setting, and you don't have to worry about it loosening up on you. So anytime you're torquing like screws for most objects, you want to set them at the same torque setting, so that if friction or anything is induced on it, they hold together and they keep their tension. Okay guys, the next step and final step that we're going to do for assembly would be our muzzle device. So our 5.56 barrels, 223 wild barrels, all are threaded half 28 here at the muzzle. Our M905 Talon muzzle brake is also threaded half 28. So if you guys buy a builder's kit from us or you purchase the M905 muzzle brake, that's what they're threaded for. So here we're going to walk through the mounting of the M905 muzzle brake. So as you you open your box for the brake or the builder's kit, you're going to have a shim kit, the brake, there will be a set of earplugs and some instructions. So here we're going to talk about the mounting of this brake, how we do it in-house. So the steps for this, we're going to run it all the way up on the barrel, and we're going to go as far as we can go and then back it off till we get our U.S. Arms logo to the 12 o'clock position as seen right here. Okay, so we'll run it all the way up, and then we use that gap. We check with our shims. We grab a few at a time and see. We set the shims until we can't fit the prescribed number of shims, whether it's 3 or 4. We check, and once we get to a point where we can't set the shims in between the face of the barrel and the back of the M905 brake, now we have pretty close to the prescribed amount of shims to set the distance between the face of the barrel and our brake. Now what this does is this creates a solid flat alignment. Because of the brake's length, we want to ensure that the brake bore line and the bore of the barrel are directly in line with one another, and that we do not have an off-centered thread, because that would put us in a position of possibly having it's not a baffle, but a strike of the bullet inside of this mechanical brake, this mechanical device, which is a brake. So we use the shims, which are perfectly ground flat, to be the kind of intercessor between the face of the barrel, which is cut flat, and then the back of this brake, which is flat, which gives us a true bore line from exiting the muzzle to exiting the brake. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and thread this brake all the way on as far as we can take it, and then we are going to set up. Now you might get a little bit of resistance as you go up. Sometimes that's the phosphate finish in the brake, and so as we run it up, we'll just kind of work it on and then continue all the way up till we get as far as we can go with hand tight. You may have to work it back and forth a little bit. It is a tight fit, so once we get it on there, then we're going to set the prescribed amount of shims. All right guys, so I've run this M905 brake up as far as I can get it by hand, and I have, as you can see here, a small gap between the back of the brake and the facing side of the barrel. So with our shim kit, I've opened this up with the blade, and I'm going to just take a few shims. I'm taking a look at about what I need. Just grab a few, and again, we're just taking a swag here, and I set that down, so I need a few more shims to get this closed up. It's about there. And the key here is to get or use as few shims as possible. Now they're going to they'll differ a little bit here and there depending on where the thread was started on the barrel and where the thread was started on the brake. Okay, so they'll be different from barrel to barrel, brake to brake. But again, we just want to take and use as few shims as possible, and it'll be right before, so I can drop that in there about right there, and then as we can see, it just does fit in between the gap. If you don't have to use this is our biggest one, I would not recommend using it. So now I have about what I need here, and I'm just going to thread this back off and then place those shims back on it and run it back up. Now again, if we take a look here from the front, this is about, from the 12 o'clock position, this is about where we want to be. Okay, that slight 15 degree cant, 20 degree cant of what we should be end up tightening with like an adjustable wrench or some other tool. All right guys, the final step. So we have estimated what we needed for shims between the barrel and the back of the M905 brake. So we put that prescribed number of shims, and then we run the brake back up to as tight as we could get it with our hands. So again, we have about a 20 degree offset from the true 3 to 9 o'clock position that we need for this upper receiver. So this brake being flat, we want the the vectoring sides of the brake to be at the true 3 and 9 o'clock position. So what I'm going to do is some of the paper from the shim kit, I took my blade and cut some of this paper off so that I wouldn't mar or mess up the finish on the brake. And now I can use an adjustable wrench here, just kind of snug it up. And by eye, you can center yourself in front of the upper receiver, and then this center line, as you look at it in the center of the brake, you can use that to look right down the barrel and line it up at the 12 o'clock position. So from here, we apply a little bit of pressure to get those shims tight between the brake and the barrel. And when we get close, you can just take a look at it by eye. So it needs to go just a little bit more. And this isn't rocket science. And we're putting a good amount of pressure between the brake and the upper receiver. And so for here, I'm going to turn it just about a 1/16 of a turn. There we go. All right. And again, if you have a perfectly flat surface, you can take a level and set it on your upper receiver, and then another line level and set it on the brake, and that'll give you like a no BS, this brake is level and at the perfect 3 and 9 position for the upper receiver group. The last thing we want to do here to finish up the mounting of the brake are these 2 set screws here on the side. Okay, we're going to remove those screws and put blue Loctite on those screws and then run them back down. So this is going to finish off. Not only did we get a little bit of torque between the brake and the barrel, but now we're going to cinch it down, because we don't want to produce a whole lot of torque, but this clamping section of the brake, we want to have these screws set and locked. Now this is going to be around 30 inch-pounds for these 2 screws here. 30 to 35 inch-pounds, you're not going to go wrong. And then allow that blue Loctite to set in place. And once you've done so, the last thing we're going to do is pull this upper receiver group off. We can lay it at 12 o'clock position. Now, if you guys hear that rattling noise, that is the floated gas tube kind of pinging around in that upper receiver portion right there. And that also lets us know that we assembled the gas return system, gas block, and gas tube here on the upper receiver properly. Because if it was laying against one of the sides, it wouldn't be able to freely rattle around like that. So here, we have our charging handle and our reassembled bolt carrier group where we check the headspace. So we take our charging handle in, we have to drop it into that recess there and then slightly push forward. Our bolt, we make sure it extends. Now if we want to check the gas rings on it, we should extend the bolt, be able to set it up on the table, and the bolt shouldn't drop. If you set it in this position and it drops down like that, you need to replace those 3 gas rings. Okay, but so this one passed the test. Again, if we press the firing pin here and drop the bolt, we should see the firing pin protrude just past the face also. Last check would be make sure that the firing pin retaining pin captures the firing pin and doesn't fall out the back. All right, once you've done those 3 checks, we can now set with the bolt extended and forward, drop the bolt carrier group in, we can press our charging handle in, close the bolt, close the dust cover, and now we have a fully assembled US Arms upper receiver group with the M905 brake. We appreciate you guys being here with us for the full assembly of this upper receiver. Thank you again, and look forward to another video.